This video is going to show you how I do my 2-in-1 sock. This is not to be confused with the 2 at a time socks, which are usually done on a circular magic loop or are done on 2 circulars. Now what you see here is just your basic toe-up sock. So just a plain vanilla recipe, nothing special about it. But where the real magic happens is when we look on the inside. Now see here, you can see that I am actually knitting 2 separate socks on one set of double pointed needles using 2 separate balls of yarn. Now the only place that these two are connected are where both sets of stitches are sitting on these needles. If I were to have a connection, when I pulled these out, there would be a tug, and then you would know that you would have a connection that you would want to fix. A few suggestions before we get started. The first is that you would use 2 separate colors. Here you can see the difference between the stitches. The contrast is high, so you can easily tell which you're knitting, the front versus the back. So here are my 2 separate balls. That makes it easier, especially your time out. Once you get colors that kind of look the same, it gets harder to tell the difference. My second suggestion is that you check often to make sure that you don't have any connections. You can do this by looking at the back, seeing if you've got the yarn from the front or the back crossing over, or pulling the sock out. It just takes a few moments and it will save you trying to frog back a sock. The third suggestion is to cast them on separately. So this one I did, and I cast on my toes on separate needles, and then I knit through to the increases. After I finished all the increases, I then connected them both on one set of needles. It saved me from having to try to do something fancy while learning, and I just had to do the knits all the way up. This would work for the top down as well. I would suggest you go ahead and cast on, connect to the round, do your ribbing, and then connect them onto one set of needles, and you're set to go. This also would be the perfect application for an afterthought heel, where all you do is you knit the tube till you finish, and then you can separate the socks and put in the heel however you want. Now let's talk about the 3 different ways that we can handle our yarn. The first I like to call the pick and flick method. Basically you're holding one yarn, the front, in your left hand, continental style. The other you are holding in your right hand, English style. And then let's work some of these stitches. So the first one presenting here is our front sock. What we need to always remember, and keep this in mind no matter what you're doing or how you handle the yarn, keep this front yarn always in the front unless you are working the stitch. So here we will work this stitch and then bring that yarn back to the front. Just kind of hangs out there while we work the back. And again, bring it back, work that stitch, bring it back to the front. A lot of people will do their stranded color work this way, and you can really get into a rhythm doing it that way. I find that this is a little more difficult. I am a continental knitter. If you have to itch your nose or adjust your glasses or get a drink, you have to drop both yarn, or at least drop one hand and then retension and pick it all back up and start over again. But the other things that are good about it is that you are tensioning your yarn individually with each hand, and it gives you a little more control. Now with this method, I actually find that because of the way I hold this yarn, I actually have a tighter gauge on the inside sock than I do the outside sock. That's more of a personal thing. But since I'm knitting these two different socks, they won't be a matched pair, but that's okay. I'll put the yarn back on the inside, and then I will have two inside socks that match and two outside socks that match. The second method I like to call the 2-in-1 method. Basically, I'm going to hold these continental style. So I separate them, one on each finger, my first and my second. Get this yarn out of the way. And then I just knit that first stitch, bring it to the front, and you can see that my fingers are straddling this needle. The back finger just sits there, it doesn't do anything. It is only this front that will go back and forth. Now, as a continental knitter, this is going to be a purling position for me, so it's very comfortable. It's not awkward at all. So let's work this back stitch. Bring the front back, work the stitch, back to the front. Now you can see how this can get very quick. With only one finger moving, you have made your movements more efficient, and therefore you will be a faster knitter. The third method is what I like to call the slip stitch method. Basically because we are slipping every other stitch depending on which yarn we are using, and we are only using one at a time. So I drop one yarn, we're going to start with the front, and I knit that stitch. I bring it back to the front because it only hangs out and back when we are actually knitting with it. Slip the next stitch, bring it back, work that stitch, back to the front, slip, knit, back to the front, slip, knit, back to the front, slip. Now basically what I have done is I have just worked one row only on the front sock. The back sock is still missing that row. Here's my yarn. So once I get all the way around and back to this stitch, I then drop this front yarn, drop it in front, and I will then knit the opposite set of stitches. Again, I'm going to knit this continental. That's the normal way I knit, which is one of the advantages of doing it this way. You can knit however you normally knit. The tension on the inside and the outside is going to be the same since you're constantly holding it the same way. Let's go ahead and work these. Let's slip that first stitch, knit the back, slip the first, knit the back, slip the first, knit the back, slip the first, and knit that back stitch. This is going to be slower for most people simply because you are knitting 2 times around to get one row. But as a beginner, that may be a more convenient way to do it. When you're finished, you have 2 completed socks. I find it easier to only have to cart around one set of needles and get 2 socks done while knitting on only what appears to be one.